let's just cut to the chase. And why do you decide to make a $600 primer seater? And why would you not care about the price per se? I mean, there has to be a reason where you said, you know what, every other primer seater out there is $100. Why would you make something that's 6 times the cost? And why is it so successful?
Well, why, at the time, there really wasn't a lot of expensive reloading equipment. I mean, there was some stuff, like the Prometheus here, that was expensive. But at the time, we're talking all the way back in 2014, and there wasn't a ton of this other stuff available, Well, now there's $1,000 or a $1,500 bill laying in every corner of our reloading bench. We've got a Giraud trimmer or a Henderson trimmer. Those, by the time you get those set up, they're $750 or $1,000 with pilots. Just all this different equipment, different presses. At the time, there wasn't much that was really expensive like that. And I say that loosely. It's not actually really expensive compared to the value you get out of it. Well, what did it for me was I'm sitting there priming cases, and I physically can't put enough pressure on my priming tool to insert the primer. That's what did it for me. I'm priming cases, and the tool I'm using won't physically do it. So I went out and bought every single tool available out in the world, every priming tool. Mm-hmm. Used them all. Again, various different problems with them. And of course, sometimes you just get tight pockets. This particular cartridge I was loading for, it didn't have any other brass available. So I was stuck with it. And so I'm like, man, there's got to be a better way. So I just decided, well, I'm going to invent a new tool. And I'm sitting on the couch, and it just slams into my head. Like, the whole design hits me in an instant. And I immediately just grabbed paper and just started writing it out. And within a couple of days, I went down and saw a good friend of mine down in Yankton, South Dakota. And we knocked out a prototype in polymer. Then we knocked out a prototype in aluminum. Then we made a full-fledged one out of steel. And the cost of the thing was not a factor to me because I knew it was a great idea. You have those ideas that flash into your head, and it's just, wow, okay, this is going to change the world. And for me, it was just a sheer volume thing. I was shooting so many rounds at that particular point in my shooting career. I didn't have a choice but to create something. And by the time I got finished with the CPS, of course, history tells us that there's a need for this. And whether it be just guys that are shooting a lot of volume, they don't understand or need the accuracy and precision of it. They just need to do it quickly. And then there's this whole other subsect of people where they have a physical disability, or they have arthritis, or they have something going on where, it's literally the only priming tool that they can physically use. And so the cost aspect of it at the time, it seemed crazy, like $600. Holy cow. Nobody's going to buy this thing. And I decided to myself, I don't care. When you go to build something, and you know this because you're a machinist, you're an innovator, and when you go to build something, you are going to have a point where you have to decide between cost and quality. And I said, quality. I don't care what it costs. I don't care if anybody buys it. It's going to be the best priming tool in the world for me. It's going to accomplish what I need it to accomplish. And if it'll do that, well, then there's a bunch of other elitist shooters out there that are just like me, and hopefully they'll buy it.
So, yeah, that's a great approach. And that's the approach that I always have towards everything. It's like, well, for me, it has to look good first. And I often joke that if it looks good and it doesn't work, I don't care. I just want it to look good, right? Of course, that's a joke. Yeah. So it has to look good, and then it has to function properly. And I have to blend the two, right? But yes, and then quality. It has to be, and like you said, and then after all those check boxes have been checked, then I worry about selling it or trying to. There's a lot of tools in my reloading room that I've created for myself that are nobody has ever seen, and everyone that sees them go, man, if you make those, I totally buy one. And then I go, I could never afford to make them. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I think soon I'm going to start releasing some of those tools. But that's besides the point. It starts with quality, right? Because you could have totally ruined your entire design by trying to make it cheaper, right?
Yes.
You would have had to compromise possibly what makes it good, right? What makes it function. So, what is your background? Why were you shooting so much? What were you shooting?
Well, at the time, I was shooting mostly 308s, and I was shooting competitions a little bit then. I only did that for just a few years, very short period of time. I did extremely well in competition, but I was lucky. And I would go so far as to say that I was blessed, because I found out what my calling was. I found out what my purpose or what God's anointing for me was really early. And I came to discover that what I got put here for was to mentor shooters and to create, innovate, and really just try to propel the sport of precision rifle shooting forward. And so the competition thing, it just drifted out of my mind. I just didn't really enjoy it, but I love helping competitors, I found, or helping them shoot better. And, my background comes from high technology. My first job in any capacity was working for an internet company. So, but the nature of what I get, the fulfillment that I get out of this discipline comes from entirely mentoring. And part of the mentoring, obviously, is I need to solve these problems that shooters have. And so I have a number of different innovations that I've brought to the community. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm the first guy to ever clean a barrel with CLR. Pretty sure that's an innovation. I brought tumbling with rice back into the fold. And I don't know if I should say back. I know somebody did it before I did it, but my article on that, it has helped a lot of people maintain the integrity of their case necks and have a much better seating force.
Okay. What do you mean tumble with rice? I've never done it, and let me. It's funny that you say that, right? Because I've never heard that until about 2 months ago. An F-class shooter said, "Hey, kind of hush hush, tumble with rice and get back to me," and I'm like, okay. And I don't clean my brass, so I just didn't do it. But now that you're saying this, so now tell me, let's talk about that for a bit. What does that do? Because he told me this kind of like, and he's a top level shooter,
Right. So again, we have to go back in time, and at one point, I was in the same place in my shooting career as a lot of other people are. I didn't know that much, and I just had a really strong passion for it. And so I talk to people, and you get led down these roads. You read things on the internet, and here I am taking just because somebody said so, like, oh, do this. I'm taking a drill and a bronze brush and like literally honing out the inside of my necks, and going from that to stainless tumbling and all of this. And I'm finding these problems during this whole thing. No matter how I tumble, the process that I use, obviously started out with corncob media and all that different types of media, walnut and all of this. And that whole time I'm using different lubricants. And then I finally stumbled onto Imperial sizing wax. And that kind of changed things. I'm like, wow, this is really amazing. And then I've got shooters telling me, don't use a expander mandrel, and make sure you use a bushing die and all of this stuff, and make sure that you're not full length sizing. And so I go through that whole thing, and I know you and I are aligned on all this. And finally it occurs to me, okay, this is all broken. People are approaching this from the wrong perspective, because if you're having to do a single pass manual op, there's no way that you can do it the same way every time. Every time you put that brush in and out of the case mouth, it's going to change. The brush itself is going to change. The amount of stuff that's stuck on the brush is going to change. And as you do this, you're going to be wearing out the brush. And so this whole process is broken. I go through the stainless tumbling thing, and I'm struggling to get half MOA because I can feel it, right? I end up seating 100 bullets and culling 50 because they feel all wrong, you know, like there's no uniformity to the seating force that I'm applying. And so I go looking like, there's got to be a better way. And it just occurs to me, okay, what's some abrasive stuff that I could use? You know, like, and so I'm digging around the house. I'm jumping in my wife's pantry and looking at all these like seeds and, you know, so I grab like a dozen different things, and it's mostly grain products, you know, like bird seed, and like I use all this different stuff. And she had some rice. So I grabbed the rice. I'm like, this actually might work kind of good. I tumble in the rice. The rice that I was using was like long grain rice. So it jammed in every single flash hole, and I had to poke it out of every single flash hole. But then I go on the internet and I find this medium grain rice, this special grain rice. And the article that's on the library section of my website, it details exactly what rice I ended up settling on. And I tumble in this rice. And I take a magnifier and I'm looking at the case necks, right? The inside of the case necks. And I'm seeing a uniform surface finish, unlike anything that I've ever seen. But it has this innate lubricity to it. And I've tried all of the Molly, the dry neck lube. And I mean, if you want to make a mess on your reloading bench, that's a good place to start right there.
Yeah.
So the rice, it has an absorptive quality. It also has an abrasive quality. So it absorbs all of the trash that would be flying in the air, all those dust particles. It absorbs that and goes inside the case, cleans the inside, but not overly. That's the important part. It doesn't clean it so much that it takes away the lubricity. And what I ended up with, by tumbling in rice and using imperial sizing wax, and I, of course, use full-length dies, custom-honed full-length dies with an expander mandrel, a high-rise expander mandrel that is contacting the neck before the neck comes out of the neck portion of the die. And I always take a little bore mop. I've got these little bore mops here, and I'll coat that in imperial wax. And when I go to size the case, I'll uniformly lube the exterior of the case, and then I'll run that bore mop, just a nice little twist inside the neck. That makes sure that none of the expanders are grabbing on and scoring and damaging the inside of my necks. And then when I tumble it in the rice, it actually absorbs all of that lube that's on the cases, and it takes the imperial off, but yet it leaves enough of the mixture of the imperial and the carbon, or the residue inside of the case neck. It leaves enough of that there to where I have the most uniform seating that I have found in any technique in my entire career.
Wow. See, I'm lazier than you are. I hate lubing necks. So you know what I did? I made my mandrels. And see, this is me letting the cat out of the bag. I've never heard of anyone doing this. So, patent pending.
Yeah,
right? That just always brings me back to that Simpsons episode where Homer, anyway, he just go around and pointing at everybody, patent pending. You can go to McMaster and you can find carbide impregnated bronze. Not carbide. Not carbide. What's the word I'm thinking? Graphite impregnated bronze. So I make my mandrels out of that.
Ah.
So they just self lubricate.
And you find that it doesn't build up, like you get those streaks.
Oh,
you know what
absolutely.
I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. No, it doesn't. It's amazing. It's the most amazing thing.
Wow.
So those are some of the products that I plan to release eventually, because they are. You don't have to lube anything. It's the lube. It's graphite impregnated. It's, well, you know what it is. It's bronze, but it's the graphite.
You got my address, right? You got my address,
right?
Send me some of those.
And they just work amazingly well, because the graphite, it's already in there.
Right.
Yeah, they wear out faster than carbide, obviously, but so what? I just make another one, and it just, they work. I actually don't use them on brass that that I'm sizing. I just don't use anything there. But if I'm necking up brass, you have to neck up 6.5 to 284 all the time. I just make one of those mandrels, and it's amazing the difference. But anyway, so you use Imperial wax.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to send you one of these mandrels, and you tell me what you think. Because the fact that you don't have to lube anything. But I'm wondering if the Rise isn't actually taking the lube and then just removing the excess and leaving a real light coat. And that's what gives you... And that's what gives you the consistency.
I almost think, because the exterior of the case is clean, though. There's not any really done correctly,
Well,
I think it might be the combination of the lube and the carbon residue.
Well, there's spores in the brass. I wonder if it doesn't leave. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I don't know.
The exterior of the case feels clean and it looks different than the interior of the case mouth. So I almost think that the lube and the rice together are polishing that and leaving the lubricity, as you mentioned.
Well, there's a lot more rice going around the outside than there is around the inside. So maybe it's just a time thing. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's getting a lot less agitation, right? Because the brass is not flowing through the inside. The rice is flowing around the outside all the time. So maybe it's just the reason they look different is the fact that it's not doing it as much on the inside.
That could be. And for me, the critical aspect was I could batch the process, so I didn't have to one-on-one do something. And the rice isn't changing because of the large batch, and so the entire firing on that particular batch of brass, it's all getting treated the same, and it's happening automatically without my error input. So and I think that's a pretty critical aspect of it.
So I've been looking at those things. See, I'm trying to get back into PRS possibly next year, and I want to load ammo. I want to chamber a barrel, work up a load, and then load 2,000 rounds for the life of the barrel. New barrel, size of the brass. So I'm looking for ways to batch the entire thing. You know what I mean? To do 2,000 rounds at a time. So
you can do it with rice.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I have one of those big tumblers that F-Class John actually makes those. Big tumbler. It's like the little tumbler, but this thing's big. And I could fit probably 500, maybe 1,000 pieces of brass at a time. So absolutely. I'm going to try it because that's what I'm looking to do. But anyway, so rice works.
Rice works. It gives me and I can actually see this on the AMP press. When I sent a graph to the guys at AMP, they're like, how are you getting that low of seating force? Because I'm showing seating force down at like 35 pounds.
That's where I seat.
Yeah, like 35 pounds and a uniformity of like 2 or 3 pounds right across. And so the process works. It works phenomenally, and it allows you to do a large quantity automatically, and you don't have to worry about.
Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you some graphite impregnated mandrels, and 100 pieces of brass for you to tumble for me.
Okay.
Then I'll get them back and I'll try them. You know what I mean? Just get you to tumble them and then send them back, and then I'll see how they look. Because I use Imperial dye wax on the outside.
Yeah.
That's how I size all my stuff. So interesting. I mean, man, now I'm thinking we shouldn't release this video.
Yeah. We're not even done talking yet. We're not even to the good stuff.
I know. So the CLR, okay? Yeah. This is interesting that you say that, because obviously it's hard to know who was the first one to do anything, right? Because by the time I released that CLR video, I've been doing it for years, and those are some of those things that it's like hush hush, and at some point it's like, okay, it's been hush hush long enough that it's probably fine to let the cat out of the bag now. You know what I mean? And I could not believe the success of that video where people go, holy crap. And I'm like, and see, it's we do something for so long that you start to think, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows by now. You know what I mean? And
well, yeah. You had to hear it from somewhere. And see, that's the beauty of it, is like, because I'm not competing myself, I don't have to worry about not letting the cat out of the bag. Instead, I've got the opposite thing, right? I'm trying to mentor people. I'm trying to get them to advance. And so you can go back and look, like Sniper Side or Long Range Hunting or a couple of the forums that I hang out. And yeah, I mean, you'll see a post it's years and years ago.
Well, it's one thing to hear it. I mean, I hear stuff all the time. And what happens is I test everything. And I can't test everything, right? Because, I mean, there's only so much time in a day. Although I did just get a railgun, and there's going to be a lot of testing coming up. But I heard it from a very reliable source, okay? And I said, I'll try it. And I was amazed at the carbon that came out. And see, I use a borescope all the time. So I have a pretty good idea of how long something takes, right? But I was amazed, right? And I'm like, okay, this works. So I used it for a few years, and then it's almost like, okay, now I can let it out. The person that told me about it, he's fine with me letting people know, because I mean, it's been so long, right? But I mean, it works amazingly well.
Well, the way I originally using it to eat carbon, that wasn't my idea. Originally, I came across this because of the guys at Thunder Beast. We've been using CLR forever to get carbon out of our suppressors, right? And so I'm sitting here, and I've got just tons of suppressors, and I'm sitting here dumping CLR. I take a little rubber stopper and shove it in the end of the can, set the can upright, and fill it full of CLR. And I cycle it like that, So I'm sitting here doing that, and then I set them to soak, and then I come back and I'm cleaning my rifle, and I think to myself, wait a minute, it's working so good to take this residue. Why can't I use it in the barrel? So I jumped on, and I'm looking around like, okay, is it going to hurt the barrel? And no, not really. But I did find some cautionary evidence, like, okay, you probably shouldn't use it on a real pretty blued barrel, because it'll probably eat the bluing. And I think that is true. But I have all stainless barrels, Cerakoted and stuff, and it never hurts to Cerakote on the suppressors. So I thought to myself, why not? But yeah, that was like, I don't know how many years ago. I mean, we're talking back 2014, 2015. I don't know when I first put out content on it. But yeah, to my knowledge, I was the first guy to ever do that. And it has been just, like you said, it's amazing. It's like a miracle for getting carbon out of the barrel.
Yeah, and black nitride, I get that question all the time, and believe it or not, I got literally thousands of black nitride products, and I've never tested it, but I did have a customer finally say, look, I tested it. I dunked your muscle brake into your black nitride muscle brake into CLR, left it for 2 hours, nothing happened. I said, great. So now when they ask me, I'm like, leave it in there for an hour.
Yeah. Well, the key part is don't leave it in there. Like you say, if you leave it in there too long, the CLR will actually start to crystallize. And this is with everything, even just a regular stainless part. The CLR will start to crystallize, and trying to get that crystallized CLR off of the part is, I mean, it's really hard. You have to like sandblast it. I mean, it's really not easy to get off.
So, all right, CLR, rice. Let's get back into the primer seeder. Man, I don't even know where to start because.
Well, I'd like to point out at first, it's actually one of the cheapest tools you can get on your reloading bench now.
Well, I know that.
Everything else is more expensive.
And this is where I said I don't know where to even start because it's cheap. It's all about value, right? And what the value is equivalent to the importance that you place on that step. And I think the uphill battle that you had possibly, or you still having, I doubt it because but where I'm going with this is nobody places primer seeding depth really high on the important scale for accuracy, all right, and precision, right? And that's where I think the value is, right? Now, everybody places neck tension really high, right? So of course, you know, the amp guys, they make an amazing amp annealer. They've converted me. I was a naysayer, and now I'm an amp user. And I did that by testing, right? The press that they have, I've bought every single press that's ever made. I bought the K&M when it first came out. Then I replaced it with a hydro press, and now I replace my hydro press with the amp seeder. Okay, and where I'm going with this, right? It's everybody places neck tension really high.
Yeah,
really
everybody
high.
Really wants to control that. Yeah.
So spending, I don't know, like the hydro press was $350, I think, when it was released. It was around the 300 mark. It was high, but it was like, dude, this is gonna solve my neck tension, right? And because we placed neck tension so high on the importance scale, it didn't seem like much, right? Well, now this amp press, same thing, right? Oh, well, man, this thing grabs the whole thing, and because it is controlled, because one of the problems that we had with any of the presses was how hard you work that handle, right, can influence the graph,
right.
Or I call it the graph, but the gauge, right? But again, it's neck tension. We all know neck tension matters, so, well, what about seating depth or primer seating? Primer seating, I don't think anybody places primer seating anywhere near close to neck tension.
And they should. It's a shame that they don't.
You and I both know that, but
yeah.
What I'm getting at is that is not common knowledge. You ask any competition shooter, like high level, they're going to be like, of course, it's super important. But the majority of the people don't know that. They just assume, just seat the primer and go, right? And most
put the primer in the hole.
As long as there's a primer in there, you're golden. And that is so far from the truth. And that's where I'm going with this, right? How do you handle this? Do you go out and educate people on this? And are you maybe not as reliable of a source because you have a $600 primer seeder and they're like, this guy is telling me, but nobody else is telling me this. Only the guy with a $600 primer seeder. How do you battle that?
Well, it's been interesting because there's a number of really high level shooters that have been using our CPS since it came out, you know, because they understood the value of it right away. And so there was a fair number of early adopters, but a lot of those guys had a vested interest in other people not knowing about how important it was And so that was a problem. But then thankfully there's enough demand in shooting sports for volume shooters. And because trying to have the conversation about precision and accuracy and how the CPS is quite literally the only tool on the face of the planet that can get you the kind of precision and accuracy that you're going to want out of it, if the rest of your ecosystem is worked out. But there's a ton of people that need to sit down and prime 300 cases or 350 cases to get ready for a match. And those people all had the same complaints that I did, where like, man, sit down and try this with a hand primer. My hand is just tortured. Try to sit here and use a bench primer and they're just clunky and they don't work right. I got to single load them or whatever. And so that's where I focused for a few years on the marketing aspect of the CPS, was to convince people like, listen, this is going to be the fastest, most effortless, and safest way that you can prime a high volume of cases. And I'm talking 1,000 or 1,200 an hour that exists on planet Earth. So let's just start there. And then if you want to have the conversation about how, yeah, you can legitimately cut your groups in half by performing some testing with the CPS, then call me back and we'll have that discussion. So I just instead focused on the utilitarian aspect of it and just how people could prime effortlessly, fast. They could have their kid sit there and do it, and it's basically impossible to screw up.
Have you ever wondered if you haven't approached this incorrectly? Because you are approaching it as like, look, this is going to make primer seating so easy, right? So you have to almost, and they go, yeah, but $600, right? Whereas if they really understood how important primer seating is, that thing would sell itself. Like, but you would have to educate. But then again, like you said, there's so
you come into the credibility aspect, though. That's the thing. I tried focusing on that for a couple of years, probably, and telling people like, listen, you're missing out big time on how important this primer seating depth, and not just the depth, but everything that's going on with ignition timing in this priming op. You're missing, like you're leaving accuracy and precision on the table. And they come back and say to me two things. Number one, hey man, I'm shooting third MOA right now. I'm not really asking for anything more than that. And realistically, I don't think that what you're telling me is going to get me any more than that. Okay. They don't know at all what I'm talking about, but they're resolute on that. And I'm like, well, okay, if you're not asking for more, you're not asking for more. Go be happy. And then the second factor comes in. It's like, well, I'm the guy selling it. Why is anybody going to listen to me?
Well, and you touched on something else about competition shooters. And this is something that most people don't realize. And it's precisely what you just said. When they find something that actually gives them an edge, that is like the worst thing that can happen to you slightly, right? Because you're like, great. And they're like, yeah, but I'm not telling anybody else about it.
Right.
Because I want this edge, right? And then you're like, oh, that sucks, because now you have a reliable source, but they're not willing to tell nobody.
Right. Well, like for instance, okay, so that's the thing, the credibility aspect. It's taken a tremendously long time because this is so important and it's so good that anybody at the high level of competition refused to talk about it. Now, that's changing a little bit here recently. I don't know if you know a guy named Jason Wolf, but he's a customer of mine, friend of mine, South Dakota resident, and he has won I think it's 600-yard, is it IBS or IBO? I forget. 600-yard bench rest. Uh-huh. Yeah. He won that 2 years in a row, and to a degree that hardly anybody won. The list of his accolades is up, I think, on Alex Wheeler's website. But this guy, Jason Wolf, has been using my CPS, and he absolutely loves the thing. He went out and won a competition, if I remember the story correctly, with brass that his kid primed on the CPS.
Well, and that's the beauty of it, right? If you can, there's so many tools out there that if it takes a very educated operator to make it function properly. But when you build something, the Prometheus is a great example. You can literally, anybody can use that thing and it'll throw the most perfect loads regardless of who's using it, because all you have to do is line up the arrows. I mean, it lines up the arrows. And then
the kernel.
Exactly.
Every charge.
So when you have like your primer seeder, so for example, I prime by hand for years. And I was one of those that go, I don't need to spend $600 because my $20 hand primer does this, right? But I had this feel, right? That I'd done thousands and thousands of rounds, and I just knew the feel, right? But then I couldn't have nobody else prime my brass because I couldn't trust anybody. With the CPS, like you said, I could let anybody prime my brass because it's like just pull the handle until it won't go no more. Right. It's literally that positive stop, right? So, number one, sounds like I need to talk to this Jason guy. And number two, so now you have all these top shooters that don't want to tell nobody about it because they want to, they want to have an edge.
Yeah, it's an edge.
How do you go about educating the everybody else?
Yeah, so I put out a bunch of content over the years that have talked about it. But again, the credibility issue is always there because I'm the guy that invented it. And those that know me, they know that it doesn't matter. I will sacrifice money every single day of the week for the sake of finding the truth in something. There's a lot of people that know me, and then they've been customers or they've been friends over the years. And they know that the way that I think and the way that I operate, I'm always looking for that solution, right? What is actually the truth of what's going on here? And so the financial aspect of it is irrelevant to me, always has been. But if you don't know that about me, well, then it's really hard to take what I'm saying at face value. And so it comes down to people's ability to recognize truth when they hear it. And then two, it comes down to their willingness to go and test appropriately. Like, I'm a huge fan of your approach because it mirrors my own. It's like, you want to know something? Test it. And if you don't know if you're testing it appropriately, then go to the people that are advocating it and ask them for help in creating the test, but bottom line, eventually you will discover what the truth is. And so the way that I've been able to handle that is on a one-on-one basis. Customers call and they're inquiring about the CPS and they say, Greg, it's a lot of money. And I say, well, it's really not. This thing is going to touch every single primer that you put into a case, and it's going to do so for the rest of your life. And then it's going to do that for your kids' and probably your grandkids' life. And so actually every single round that you fire, $600, okay, you've got a $350 bipod on one rifle. You've got $4,000 into your optic on one rifle. This thing's going to touch every single piece of ammunition that you create for the rest of your life. So then the conversation shifts to, okay, you got me. I'm willing to spend the money. But what does it do that these other ones can't do, right? And that's where the high-level discussion of performing a primer seeding depth test and how to approach the discussion. Once I explain to them that primer seeding depth and the relationship of that primer to the static powder column in the case and the fire control group, the ignition system in the rifle, once I explain to them that this is all the last little hiding place for precision and accuracy, because you've done your bullet seeding depth testing, you've done your powder, your charge weight testing, you've manicured your brass to the nth degree, you're making sure that your charge weights are dead on, and all these other steps that people are going through to uniform. And then you just take a hand primer and mush a primer in there to some, and it's like, once I explain to people that this is the last conversation in the discussion of ignition timing, then they start to get it. Then they say, well, oh, wow. So it actually matters how far the primer is away from my firing pin and that timing, because everybody understands to at least some basic degree the nature of harmonics and how the rifle is responding. And we're tuning all of this with our bullet jump, our charge weight, and our brass. Our shoulders are being set back just perfectly. And we know that all of this determines timing. Well, what's the first thing that gets hit? It's the primer. The first thing that happens is that sear releases the firing pin, it releases the cocking piece, that firing pin moves forward and slams into the primer. It's the first thing that happens.
Yeah, and without that, nothing happens.
Right. So the distance between that primer cup and the firing pin is a critical dimension. It is, like we were talking before about, bullet seating depth and or the neck tension, as people put it. Everybody puts this huge emphasis on it, and it's like, that's like fourth in the order of things that's taking place. So the ignition timing and the tuning of ignition systems in rifles, and whether or not you've got cock on close, or whether your cocking piece is dragging on your action, or the raceway in your action, or whether it's dragging on the sear in your trigger. I mean, all of these different factors, nobody even talks about it. And then because they don't talk about that, there's no reason to talk about how important primer placement is. And when they say, well, it's not important, just jam the primer in there until the anvil touches the bottom of the pocket. Well, for them, they're right, because they're not paying attention to anything. But if you're paying attention to this stuff, primer seating depth all of a sudden becomes just as important as bullet seating depth or neck tension or any of these other things. It becomes like multiple orders of magnitude more important once you understand. And then too, if you have the rest of your ecosystem worked out, if you've got a great rifle built by a great smith, and you're using top quality components, and all the rest of the gear on your reloading bench is producing really good straight ammo, I've had people report back to me that they've literally shrunk their groups by 2/3 just by performing a primer seating depth test. So it is a huge deal. I can't possibly understate how important it is, overstate how important it is.
So bench rest shooters, 100-yard, have you heard of the spring tuning that they do? So these guys have obviously everything, but then what they do is they cut these shims, and they shoot a group or multiple groups, right? They disassemble the spring, they put a shim in there, just like a little washer.
Yeah.
And they reassemble it. And that's just going to give it a slightly more spring pressure, right?
It alters the timing.
And then they shoot another, and then they tune the firing system. I mean, but now, don't go do this on your rifle. This is like after. I mean, these guys are shooting zeros, and they're trying to. They might be shooting ones, and when we say ones, in like 0.1 groups, like 100,000, and they're trying to get below that. This is like a drag racer when they take out 1 psi out of their tires or things of that nature, right? But these guys are going to that nth degree to tune the timing, because everything else they already did, and there's nothing else they can do. They tune their firing pins or the spring by using I think brass or bronze. I don't know what Speedy's the one that told me about this, and I was just had never thought about it, but it is that important. But anyway, like you said, so in order for all this to work out, you have to have uniform primer pockets. Correct?
Yep.
Okay.
It's because if you're taking a linear measurement, the linear measurement has to track from something, right? So we have to take our linear measurement from some data somewhere.
Right. The problem that this is, man, I wonder how much how much controversy this is gonna cause, because nobody has ever thought about. I have never talked to anybody until I talked to you that has actually. There's a million people that sell primer pocket uniforming tools. And so many people are out there. That's one of the first things and I used to do it. That's one of the first things they do. I'm going to uniform my primer pockets. And they don't realize they're actually ruining the pockets by, especially if you're using Lapua brass, just leave it alone. Leave it alone.
Don't touch it.
Leave it alone. But here, I have one right here, right? So you have the primer pocket uniformer. Mm-hmm. And it headspaces off. It uses the case bottom or the back of the case as a stop to uniform the pocket, correct? Mm-hmm. So let's call it headspace. A headspace is on the base of the case. So now you made your primer pocket consistently from one, let's say you do 100 pieces of brass. You make it consistent to the base of the case. And they're all like, perfect. All my stuff is perfect. But then when they go see the primer see their headspace is off the top of the rim, not the bottom of the case. So the question is your primer pocket uniform to the rim, which is what really matters? The base of the case absolutely doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So, and then again, like I said, they go and they uniform all these pockets and they're like, oh, this is perfect now. No, you don't know if it's perfect because that doesn't matter. This is what matters. So have you done any testing to see, is how close? That's kind of a dumb question. I'm assuming you have done the testing. Have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
How close is that relationship from the bottom of the case to the rim? How close is it?
It's closer than you would think, and it's the nature of how these cases get made, because the vast majority of the rims, it's cut, right? It's a machining op that gets done, and the primer pockets and the lettering in the bottom of the case is bunted, right? It's pressed in there essentially, and so. Long story short, what I found is that on quality cases, Lapua cases, alpha cases, we're talking less than 5/10 thousandths of variance between the top of the rim and the bottom of the cup. And like you said, that's the measurement that's actually important. And so what happens is, like how you said, how they're ruining it. Well, that's how they're ruining it, because when they go to insert a primer with virtually any tool, that's where it's indexing on, is the top of the case rim. And they're breaking the uniformity, and they're taking the uniformity that exists from the top of the case rim to the bottom of the cup, and they're changing the uniformity to index off the base of the case. And so now you end up with a 1.5, 2 thousandths, 3 thousandths variance from the top of the rim, which is what the priming tool is indexing off of. And it breaks the uniformity.
Because what changes the uniformity is when they stamp the letters, right? Now they're slightly proud, possibly, and because your primer pocket uniformer headspace is off the back of the case, now you're actually introducing variance. So you're way better off just leaving it alone.
Way better off. Now there's one caveat to that though. Like if there is such a thing as having a batch of brass that's so bad that it would benefit from uniforming, because you can achieve something better than a really bad batch of brass. Like let's say they were just running a massively worn out bunter. There is such a thing of improving upon it. But if you don't measure it, you don't know. And you being a machinist and being around this stuff.
Let's use that term very loosely. Okay, I'm not a machinist.
So, it's actually a difficult measurement to get.
Yeah. From
the top of the rim, you're coming from two sides. It's actually a really difficult measurement to get. Most home reloaders are not going to have adequate measuring equipment to even be able to take that measurement.
Yeah, you have to, I don't know, like a quick way that I can think of that for one, it'd be really helpful to have a surface plate.
Yeah.
And then have a deal that's upside down where you can come in and measure from the bottom up and then from the top down with maybe a like a pin gauge or something. Just a known, just so it sticks out proud, right? And then you can measure.
Right.
But
pull back against the rim,
Yeah, and then I don't know.
The big part about
this, but it's not easy. Yeah.
No, and the thing is nobody's actually thinking about, well, what's the most important thing to measure? And it's like, so let's say that you do, because I created a prototype case holder that indexed off the shoulder of the case to try to solve this problem, right? It's like, well, let's just hold the cases differently. Well, then you run into the issue where the case rim is really hard. It's the hardest part of the case. And the shoulder is soft. And when you try to seat a primer, especially if you've got a tight pocket or something like that, or maybe slightly oversized batch of primers, you'll change the headspace on your case. I mean, you'll push the shoulder back 1,000th or 2,000.
Oh, by head spacing off the shoulder. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's like really soft.
Yeah, it's super soft. And it doesn't have enough strength to withstand the amount of force that is required to get those primers in there. And that's not even entering into the discussion of anvil crush. And then you really start putting some force on there, because it takes a tremendous amount of force to overcome the anvil seat in these primers. I mean, it's phenomenal.
So yeah, I guess you could make a holder that when you drop it in, it head spaces off the rim, and then you drop something in the hole, and then you can measure. And then you can just measure really fast. But yeah, it requires some special tooling to measure. Yeah. Now, how much does that really matter is the other question. It's like everything else, right? Okay, there's a variance, but how much does it matter? It's like bullet weight.
Yep.
It's not that important. You know what I mean?
Yep. So and this is the part where it starts to get really simplistic, right? Because it's like, knowing all of this stuff and having tested all of this stuff, it's easy for me to identify, okay, what's actually the important factor, and why is it important, and how do you achieve your solution, right? Because knowing all the information is one thing. The nature of this measurement, right, and like I've established, has been better than 5/10,000ths on most cases. It's actually better than that. It's close enough to where it becomes difficult to even measure. And when you start trying to measure 1 or 2 10,000ths, it's difficult to even do that repeatedly with anything other than.
Is that on all cases or just the top level stuff?
I would say that's the top ones. I spend my time shooting Lapua and Alpha munitions cases. Specifically, Alpha's new OCD stuff is just unbelievably good. Early in my career, I shot all kinds of stuff. Winchester, Lake City, Hornady, this, that, and the other. I mean, it was Nosler, Norma. These days, when I choose what kind of cartridge I'm going to be shooting, it is led by whether or not I can get Lapua or Alpha cases for it. I mean, quite literally.
That was with my mentor in F-class, Mike Downey, over a decade ago, when I was getting into F-class. He said, because I was thinking about trying all these different cartridges, that's just the nature of the new guy, right? It's like trying to beat everybody else with ballistics. But anyway, he told me, he goes, if Lapua doesn't make brass for it, don't waste your time chambering for it. And to this day, that's what I do. And, like I said, I don't do anything to Lapua brass. I don't uniform pockets. I don't do anything to the flash holes. I just neck turn, and that's it.
Right. Yeah, and I neck turn as well. I've got that same thing. Auto dodge.
Yeah, but so, all right. So obviously there is, if you have, I'd hate to name brands, but at what point at what level do you say, okay, you might as well uniform pockets?
It's not so much brand as it is lot number, because I mean, I've got a batch of Lapua cases up here. I got to call like 10% of my 6BR because it's got creased shoulders. I mean, every company has the capacity to put out good product and bad product.
Yeah, now, but I mean, I'm talking about the primer pockets. Well, I mean, I know that's used as an example, but is there? Here's where I'm getting at, right? You say, well, not all of them are bad. Well, by saying that implies that you must measure them all, and then we already said that it's really difficult to measure. So at some point, you have to say, look, if you have this type of brass, you might as well uniform it just to be safe. Like, for example, with Lapua, I'm just like, don't even mess with it, right? That's my...
Yes, Lapua, Alpha, OCD, don't even mess with it, period. Now, I wonder how many people know that the primer pocket depth changes after you fire it. You know, I wonder how many people... Not many. Right. And so then do you uniform that away, or does it move uniformly enough to where you don't have to worry about it? Okay. So how you mentioned a minute ago about how measuring it, and it's difficult to measure. Okay. Well, our new prime wire is going to solve that problem. You just grab a case and you just doink it on the top of here, and it gives you your measurement. Now, again, indexes off the base, right? Yeah. Now, here is where the discussion on brass quality comes in, right? The tolerance or variance, however you want to look at it, that Lapua cases, Alpha cases, other top end cases, that the variance between that measurement is actually extremely close, right? And so it comes down to, you need to do some type of measurement, and it needs to be easy and accessible for you to do. Otherwise, you're not going to do it. That's what our new PrimeWire depth gauge is designed to do. Make it really easy and fast. And the top of it's the same height as the CPS. So you can prime your case, doink it on the top, throw it in the bin. It's extraordinarily easy. And I've already done all that work where I've measured all these different cases. Every single brass manufacturer that produces brass, I have been able to grab pieces and measure. Most of them, a shocking number of them, even what guys would consider to be really low quality brass, because of the nature of how the cases are made, the difference, the measurement from the top of the rim to the bottom of the pocket is super close. And I'm talking like 5-10 thousandths on average. The good stuff is a couple of 10 thousandths, right? It becomes difficult to even measure. So then the question becomes, well, is it just that way on the first firing? How much does it change to the second firing? Measuring and knowing that, and having that correlate to the specific lot number of cases that you're working with and the specific lot number of primers. Because this relationship from firing to firing is going to change. And if you're not paying attention to it from firing to firing, a bad lot number of cases is going to drift monstrously more than a good lot number of cases.
Yeah, I'm cringing over here, not because of what you're saying, but what I'm afraid of is people are going to freak out over this. It's really good information, but I'm afraid people are going to go over the edge and then either go down this rabbit hole, or maybe just get too scared to even and then say, screw this, I'm done. I'm just gonna. It's not. I'm trying to word this properly so that, because I feel like this will scare off a lot of people. And that's not the point, right? The point is to put out the information and for them to simply be aware of it, right?
Yeah.
This is a lot of the reason. Sometimes you go and you shoot, and then you go, man, my gun shoots amazingly well. And then you go back and you reload that ammo, and then it's like, well, it doesn't shoot as good. And then it's man, Greg, I really don't know how to word this, or how to even relay this information without scaring people away.
Oh, okay. So let's just
help
break
me out
it down.
here. Yeah,
let's just break it down. Okay, like so, I have this conversation 10 times, 20 times a week. All right.
Okay.
Because everybody has the same concerns. They're looking for a solution. So let's teach your audience how to think about this. Priming is extremely important. It's more important than you can possibly realize. Some shooters out there understand this already. The CPS, our competition primer seeder, has the capability to allow you to seat primers more uniformly than any other tool on the planet.
How?
So, because of the one-to-one relationship, basically it's an arbor press flipped upside down. So everybody knows, again, bullet seating, arbor presses and inline dies, that's like the go-to for ultimate control. Why? Because you can feel everything. Okay, so that's what I did. I patented an upside down arbor press used for priming. That's what I did. And because of the one-to-one relationship, it allows you to get the same velocity, for lack of a better term, so that you're running it more uniformly and you can feel everything that's taking place. And that allows you to overcome the friction differential between the primer cup and the primer pocket. It allows you to overcome it because you're able to operate the press in such a uniform manner from the time the primer enters the pocket to the time it comes to a stop. You can control the speed or the velocity at which that happens. And it's the only tool out there that'll allow you to do that to that degree due to the one-to-one relationship that you have when you're seating. And you combine that with the ability to control the depth to 1/1000th of an inch. And then the rest of this ignition timing discussion comes into play. So here's how you do this. You have two main factors in priming that you need to consider. First one is reliable ignition. Now, reliable ignition means every time I press the trigger, I want the thing to go bang, right? It needs to be reliable. And if you have primers seated incorrectly, then you can have a non-reliable ignition. Now, an example of this would be if you seat the primers and the anvil is not touching the bottom of the pocket. When that firing pin travels forward, hits that primer, it's actually going to shove it forward. And the nature of how that is going to be happening each time is not going to be uniform because it's already inserted and it has to overcome the friction differential again. And it will, but it won't do it in a uniform fashion because a firing pin is not designed to seat primers. Okay. So reliable ignition. That's where it starts. What is reliable ignition? How do we get there? You take a primer pocket depth measurement, and then you take an overall primer height measurement from the bottom of the cup to the top of the anvil, and you subtract 2,000. That means you've got roughly 2,000ths of anvil crush. The anvil is fully contacting the bottom of the primer pocket, and if you start there, with every primer, with every lot number of brass, with every lot number of primers, you will have reliable ignition.
Okay. I'm so glad you brought that up because I didn't want to interrupt you, but that's one of the things that I was going to bring up. I get this question a lot, and I'm sure you get it way more than I do. They often want to measure primer seating depth from the base of the case to the primer. That is an irrelevant measurement. Because if I put a primer in here and I go, oh, I see 3,000ths below flush, that doesn't mean anything, right? Because what really matters is that primer needs to be seated against the bottom of the pocket. The top of the pocket doesn't matter at all. Like not even a little bit, right? Because, well, unless they're proud, right? But I don't want to say most, but there's a lot of people out there that always ask me, how far below flush do you, that's not, the correct way is what you just described. You must measure the thickness of the primer or the height of the primer What are they typically? 100 and
121. Like small rifle primers are a little shorter, so they're like 121 to 125.
So let's say 125. And let's say your primer pocket is 135, just to keep it simple. Okay, or 130, right? Let's say 130. Yeah. That from the top of the case, right? 125, 130. You need to be 7 thousandths.
That's right, 7,000.
The 5 differential, plus the 2 thousandths of crush that you described.
And the reason we want that 2 thousandths of crush on the anvil is because the anvils are not all 100% perpendicular. You know, they're not just dead true with the bottom of the primer cup. There's some variance in those anvil prongs. They are tilted sometimes. And so that 2 thousandths, that makes sure that at least 2 of the 3 prongs, and usually all 3 prongs, are going to be fully in contact. And as long as you have that, well, the anvil is going to resist any forward motion because it's bottomed out on the primer pocket. When the firing pin hits that cup, it's going to pinch that priming pellet, that compound, in between the cup and the anvil, and everything is going to work how it's supposed to work.
Can you crush it more than 2 thousandths?
Yes, you can. And this is where the real beautiful stuff starts. Now we're talking about ignition uniformity. Before we were talking about ignition reliability. Okay. Now we're talking about ignition uniformity. This is the part where we tune the primer's location to the ignition system in our rifle and the static powder column in the case. And so different brands of primers will allow a different range of adjustment. For instance, CCI primers, they typically have an anvil that sticks up 12 to 15 thousandths. Federal primers, on the other hand, they only stick up like 2 to 5 thousandths. They're very, very short in comparison. So the window that we have to adjust this is different depending on what primer we're using. The friction differential that exists between the primer pocket and the primer cup is different per lot number. This is not a brand or make model of primer thing. This is a per lot number, per firing test that must be performed. So here's how you go about conducting this. It's very similar to a bullet seating depth test, but here we have to remember that we're dealing with something that's very malleable. The primer cups are very soft for all intents and purposes. So when we insert the primer, when we reach a certain amount of force, there's going to be a certain amount of deformation that takes place on that primer. So this is how we make this all simple for your audience, right? And this is how this is not a scary thing or a complicated thing, not if you have a CPS. So we start with reliable ignition, right? That's our first place. Now, in your example, that is 7 thousandths below flush. Mm-hmm. We've got a 125 primer, and we've got a 130 primer pocket. And so 2 thousandths below, 7 thousandths below flush gives us that 2 thousandths of crush. That's where we start. Now, let's say we're dealing with a CCI primer, and it's 10 thousandths of anvil protrusion. Now, the anvil protrusion, you can measure that by just grabbing your caliper, and everybody's caliper's got these little sharp edge. You can measure in between the anvil prongs to the bottom of the cup, and you can see how much anvil protrusion you have, right? So in this instance, we've got 10 thousandths, and we took 2 thousandths of it to make sure that we were reliable. Mm-hmm. So we've got 8 thousandths left, and so 8 thousandths of protrusion remaining, but then we want to make sure that we overcome this friction differential, and we want to understand that these primers are going to smush around a little bit, they're going to deform a little bit. So we're going to say 8 thousandths, but yet I'm going to put 2 thousandths of cup crush. That means full anvil compression plus another 2 thousandths to overcome some of these differences. And the cups, a lot of times, they're a little ragged on the top, and a little bit of non-uniformity, and you want to overcome that as well. So you load, say, 3 rounds at -7 thousandths. That's where we start. Then we load another 3 rounds, but we put 1 click in the CPS. You don't have to worry about measuring a linear adjustment, because as we increase the pressure, the primer deformation is going to change. So the key part is 1 click on the CPS. Load another 3, another click, another 3, another click, and you just keep doing this until you end up with 2 thousandths of cup crush. That means a fully compressed, fully crushed anvil. Mm-hmm. Now, keep in mind, sometimes these primers are going to react very poorly to full crush because you'll crack the pellet, the priming compound that's in these primers. You can crack that pellet and it'll create a massively non-uniform ignition. But that's the whole point. We're performing a primer seating depth test, and we're shooting the test to reveal to us where the most appropriate timing is. In these particular cartridges that we're creating, this exact lot number of primers, this exact lot number of cartridge cases, we are discovering the most optimal timing to create the best ignition uniformity possible, because that timing has a node, just like charge weight has a node, just like bullet seating depth has a node. This has a node as well. And when you shoot it, you will see the results on your target coming in and out of your node as you approach full crush. And somewhere in there between reliable ignition and full cup contact plus 2 thousandths, you're going to discover where the most optimal timing is for that primer. And that's it. I mean, that's as easy as it gets. It's actually not really complicated. It's just, you have to understand, right? You have to first decide, like, oh, wow, ignition timing is a thing. Not only does the ignition timing in my rifle have to be worked out and everything moving uniformly, but I can tune the ignition of my cartridge case by changing the placement of the primer. And once you understand that, well, then it becomes very basic. It's just like, wow, okay, 1 click on the CPS, and you keep going until you reach a linear measurement that comes in line with the measurements that you've taken off of your individual components. That might take, so let's say we've got a 10 thousandths overall adjustment. That might take 16 clicks in the CPS to get there, because of the friction differential between the primer cup and the pocket, and the primer deformation that's going to happen as a result. And so that's why the CPS is the only one that'll allow you to do this, is because you can run those clicks, but then the one-to-one relationship allowing you to control the exact nature, the velocity that you're using, one full, complete, very deliberate stroke. You'll feel if anything is different, allowing you to cull out bad componentry, meaning if you've got a pocket that's too tight or you got a primer that's out of spec, you can set that aside because you'll feel it. But then too, the way you're able to operate the machine is in such a uniform fashion that it will be moving the same way each time, allowing the most uniform primer deformation possible. And that's why you can fine tune the ignition system to such a degree. And when you do this, I'm telling you, if you've got a properly worked out load, your charge weight is right on the money, your seating depth is where it's supposed to be, the rest of the ecosystem is all worked out, I'm talking half. It will improve your groups by half if you're already shooting half MOA. Now, those of you that have followed on my YouTube channel, which is at just YouTube/Primal Rights, or my Instagram, I got videos up, where I'm sitting there shooting 2-inch groups at 2.5-inch groups at 600 yards. And I'm not even trying, folks. And a big part of it is understanding this ignition timing. It's an amazing amazing discovery.
That's all great stuff, man. See, that's why I said, did you see that April Fool's video that I made where I drilled the back of the bullets? That's why I said, deform to perform. You should put that on your, here, I'll let you have that slogan. Put it on your deal. Deform to perform. Now, when they do this test, will they see a node?
Yes.
Maybe. Now, every click is what, 1,000th, right?
Yes. Yeah. One click on the CPS, so 1,000 linear movement.
So you'll be able to hopefully find the node where and then what do? You see to the center. That way, it gives you latitude for changes that will happen to the primer.
Exactly. Yeah. Just like you do in a bullet seating depth test. Yeah. Whichever, you're going to see the elevation change on your groups. So here's your point of aim, and they're hitting half-inch high, and it'll do that for 3 or 4 of them in a row, and then the elevation will change, right? And Eric you've got tons of content on this on your channel. I've got an article on load development on my website in the library section. But that's what you're looking for, is you're looking for those node changes, right? Where 3 rounds fired and they're right here, right here, right here, and then whoop, it'll dip down, maybe dip down again, and then there'll be another node down there, right? And this works the same way. You can see that come in and out of the node just like that.
Now, are they looking for group size or ES, or what's the telltale that they're looking for?
Performance on the target is the first one, because it will be a combination of group size, but the group location in relation to the point of aim is the number one thing. I'll take a slightly larger group size if I'm forced to pick between the two. Usually I'm not. But if I'm forced to pick between the two and I see group size and it's maybe slightly larger groups, but they're all dead even with each other on the horizontal axis, I'll pick a larger group that's right in the middle.
Well, larger group is probably a little deceiving. You'll pick consistency over the smallest group on paper.
Yes, that's right. If I have a tiny little bug hole in, let's say I've got 3 groups here and they're really respectable and tight, but I've got just little tiny bug hole knot, but it's lower on the target, I will not take that little bug hole. I will be operating over here in the middle.
Leave the target.
Yes, leave the target. Now, conversely, you will see a reduction in your extreme spreads and standard deviation on the chronograph. You will. It's a guaranteed. Just by using the CPS, it'll reduce your extreme spreads. By performing a uniformity, an ignition timing test, the way that I've just described, it will reduce it even further. Because there's a particular place where these primers like to be crushed, and a particular location in relation to the static powder column in the case that will produce the tightest possible spreads.
Well, I got a rail gun. I think I told you this, and I'm going to be doing a lot of these tests. And I've already done a lot of testing over on my private member area on my website. But there is so much testing that I'm going to do, because a lot of the stuff I've already tested, and you have to. I have a 1,000-yard range that I've had available since I started shooting F-class, right? So whenever I have a question or I just go test, right? But I've kept all that to myself, right? But I'm at a point that I think I've accomplished quite a bit. I'm fairly happy with my accomplishments, to the point that I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to put it out there. You know what I mean? It's... there was a point, my tuner, for example, that is the reason that tuner is made the way it was made, the inch 250, that was the original, because I use inch 250 barrels, and I set it back, made it flush with the barrel. The reason for that, I didn't want to make the barrel longer, right? Because then it wouldn't fit in the case. It just creates all kinds of problems. Plus, that muzzle blast, when you have the tuner that extends past the the end of the barrel, it gets built up and all kinds of stuff happens, right? So that's why I set it back. But the reason I made it inch 250 and polished is so that you could hardly tell that it was there. Even if you looked at it, I was hiding it in plain sight. And the reason I was hiding it in plain sight was I didn't, even though I was making the tuners, see, it was never meant to be for me to sell them. It was meant for me to gain an advantage over the competition. And it was such an advantage that I was trying to hide it. You know, that's literally how my tuner happened, right? It was for me to use and for nobody else, but you can't really hide it, right? So I hid it in plain sight. And I went on for a good while without anybody knowing that I had a tuner until a friend of mine, Steve Blair, he's the one that helped me a lot with the development of it. I gave him one or two, whatever. He puts it on his rifle. He goes and wins some championships with it. Accurate Shooter does a story on his rifle. They show the tuner, a big close-up of the tuner, and all of a sudden, I have a tuner business. But yeah, there's I mean, this is all very interesting stuff. I mean, and you know, I know you've done a lot of testing, a lot more than we could cover in this conversation. But man, it's so. Now let's try to put this somewhere in the order of importance, right? Mm-hmm. And kind of what I said earlier is primer seeding depth is really low on the order of importance for some reason. I think just nobody has the data, or nobody. I mean, I know you're doing that now, but it's very low on the importance order, and it should be way higher. It should be way higher.
It should be way higher. But until the CPS, there wasn't like a real efficient way to get here. You know, you couldn't trying to sit down and load 400 pieces at a time with loading it into a tool manually, even one at a time. I mean, until the CPS, there hasn't been a really intelligent way to go about doing this. And so now that it's here, I always look at what does it cost me? And I don't mean like in money, but like in time. I can't get any more time back. And so I look at what is it allowing me to do on the target, right? And these days, my targets are prairie dogs. I mean, I just love shooting prairie dogs in the face. So I'm looking to shoot a prairie dog in the face every single round I fire at 600 yards, right? That means I need to be shooting like 2 inches at 600 maximum. And if I can do better than that, that's even better, because that'll give me a little forgiveness in these South Dakota conditions I'm shooting in all the time. And so it comes down to, well, it's easy now. You can care about this and you don't have to dread it, because the CPS is so simplistic to use. It's so fast to use. I mean, you sit down and load 100 cases in 10 minutes, and that's easy to do.
The beauty about your primer seeder is literally kind of set it and forget it. That's the beauty of it. That's how I like my tools, right? Like my Giraud trimmer, my Prometheus, your primer seeder. It's a set it and forget it type of thing. Yes, you're gonna do the initial setup and all that you discussed, but once you set it, you're done.
You're good. So that allows you to solve this problem of priming without any undue stress or mental cost. It's because it's so simplistic and so easy to use. We've got the primer tube filler from Double Alpha now. We've got our custom tubes in the rack. And priming with the CPS, instead of being this thing that you have to worry about, and now all these people know, because they're going to watch this and they're, oh my goodness, I've got this whole other thing that I need to track and worry about now. Yeah. Primer seeding depth. Are you kidding me? Now I got this other thing I need to test for, and they're going to be going crazy. Listen, it's actually really easy. It's just like everything. Trimming brass is terrible and horrific and not easy and not intuitive if you don't have the right tool.
Right. Well,
your charge weights, it's terrible if you don't have the right tool. This is just like any of that. If you've got the right tool, this all becomes super simple and easy. You don't have to worry about it. You just understand this, know how to set it up, and once you're there, you're there. And you just sit down and rinse and repeat for however many hundred you want. And I mean, I've got guys that have over 2 million rounds loaded on a single CPS. And so, I mean, it stays the same. When it's brand new, you need to prime like 200 or 500 cases in order to get the tolerance stack in the system all broken in. Once that's happened, you can, if you're only shooting one cartridge, I mean, you can leave that thing sitting where it is for that particular firing on the brass. You perform your primer seating depth test and you just sit down in front of it and prime. It's not complicated.
Now, flame suit on for what I'm about to say, but neck tension, people place so much onto neck tension, and neck tension is, the level of neck tension is really not that important. What's important is the level of consistency.
Uniformity. There it is.
And a lot of people, they're always asking, well, what bushing should I use? And then they go try all these different bushings, and that's literally that's a waste of time. Just make it consistent, and that's the answer. It doesn't matter. You know, I used to shoot really light neck tensions until it bit me. My ammo would self-seat when I traveled. So I was like, okay, I'm done with that. And then I went higher, and now, you know, it's about 35 on my amp press, but it used to be like 5. Okay, so now I bumped it up, and guess what? As long as it's consistent, I tell people, I said, neck tension doesn't matter as long as it's consistent, and it's really easy to make it consistent. You run it through a bushing die, you run an expander mandrel, done. You know, it's really easy, you know. But now you have a way to make seating, primer seating, easy and consistent, right? We have a way to make bullet seating easy and consistent. And the primer, I mean, everything's pretty much handled nowadays.
Well, and the number one thing that I want people to take away from this, if they take away anything, stop believing the internet when they're trying to convince you that this thing doesn't matter or that thing doesn't matter. What Eric just said, it's the aggregate of all of this that produces the result. So if you're only doing one thing and expecting some monumental success, you're not going to find it. It all has to be there in order for it to work. And primer seating depth is not unlike any of these other things. If you pay attention to it and you add it all up in the aggregate, because you can't be messing up your case mouths, you can't be messing up your charge weight and then perform a primer seating depth test and then think that that's going to bring you back out of that and save you from the poor performance. It's not going to. It's just one more piece of the puzzle. And it's a piece of the puzzle that I think the vast majority of your viewership haven't even heard about. They haven't even thought about it.
Well, it's the, you know, if it's 20 below zero and I give you the best jacket in the world and you put it on, but you just forget to zip it up. You know, it's you got to take it all the way. You know?
It has to be all there. Everything in aggregate is where the success is found.
Right.
And uniformity being the key.
Right. And then you have to address the entire system, right? Yeah. So, for example, the other, right, you can have the most perfect ammo. Everything can be perfect. The rifle can be perfect. Everything can be perfect. But then you're jerking the trigger every time you shoot. It includes the shooter, right? And then what I tell people is, like, they always buy hardware and they never want to buy software. And that's obviously what I sell some hardware, but I also sell the software on my members area of my website, because that's where I teach all these things. And this is how you test. And this is the test that I do. And I'm showing them the test. Like, if you don't want to have the time to go test, I'll show you. And that's where the railgun comes in, right? Because I want to even eliminate the shooter from the test, right? But there's so much that matters and so much that doesn't. And the top shooters know which one is which. and they don't waste the time. Like for example, I don't uniform pockets. I don't do flash hole anything because I already know it doesn't matter. And
I don't either. I've already tested and I've already found out that it's so close that if I were to try to improve upon it, I'd actually wreck it.
Yeah, and then you're just wasting time, right?
Right.
Man, thank you. Thank you for this interview. I keep calling them an interview. It's mainly a conversation. It's you know. Did I even ask your name?
I'm Greg Dykstra with Primal Rights. Those of you that don't know me.
That shows you it's not an interview. It's just a conversation. Yeah. We jump right in. I just knew this was going to be a big topic, and we're going to have you back because there's going to be a lot of questions. I know for a fact there's going to be a lot of questions.
We didn't even hardly skim the surface on this stuff.
I know. I went down this rabbit hole a long time ago, and I'm still going. And oftentimes when I have, as you already know, when I have these questions or these thoughts pop into my head, I just call you and I'm like, "Have you tested this?" And you're like, "Yes." I'm like, "Good. That'll save me the time." Because I always tell people I'm not the smartest man in the world, but I have their phone numbers, so yeah. I use it wisely. Greg, man, thank you. We're going to have to do this again because I know there's going to be a lot of questions, follow-up. We may have to, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know this is a big topic, really big topic. It really is.
We're talking about the topic that we're talking about is ignition timing. And that is huge. I mean, just ignition timing is one of the most important things to whether, like, I have rifles that just will not shoot as good as other rifles, no matter what barrel I put on them, right? Because the action just isn't as uniform as a different one is, Now, conversely, I've got some where it almost doesn't seem like it matters what barrel I put on. I'm obviously using quality barrels, but they are so unbelievably uniform in how that firing pin travels in that action that when combined with the rest of this knowledge, like you mentioned and I mentioned earlier, the ecosystem, right? It all has to be there. The ecosystem of not just what equipment you're using, but whether or not you're operating it uniformly. Well, this conversation of ignition timing, I think, is where the biggest advancements in the sport are hiding right now.
I'm going to tell you something that most people don't realize. Let's say you take a Remington 700 and somebody wants to make a competition gun out of it. The first thing they do is they blueprint the action, right? They go open up the threads, they make everything straight and square and everything, but they do nothing to the bolt. Nothing. And I'm like, that is the first thing you should do. That is the first thing, because Remington 700s, just like the action, the bolt is built the same way, right?
Yeah.
And what set me down this path, I had two identical. I always try to have two identical rifles: my main rifle, my backup rifle. Okay, and I could interchange barrels and bolts, whatever. Okay, and let's say rifle 1 and rifle 2, and I had barrel 1 and rifle 1. Okay. And then I pulled it off and I put another barrel on it. And then I wanted to shoot that barrel again. And I said, well, I just put it in barrel 2. So now I put barrel 1 and rifle 2. Okay. Known barrel. It wouldn't shoot very well. And I was like, what the heck, man? I know this is a good barrel. What's going on? And then I was like, well, I'll switch it back. Well, the easiest thing to do is just switch the bolt. I switched the bolt and I'm like, oh, yep. Crap. So that sent me down. Well, then I'm really good friends with Speedy. And I learned a lot of what I know. I'm going to say most of what I know about gunsmithing from Speedy. And Speedy told me that if he was given a choice to blueprint a Remington 700 action or blueprint the bolt, the whole timing and ignition and the trigger, he said he'll 100% do the bolt first. If he only had one choice, he'd just do the bolt and nothing else. Yep. And oftentimes, I've gotten to the point, for one, I don't really mess with 700s anymore, but when I do, I don't do anything to the action. I simply blueprint the bolt, fix everything that's wrong with the bolt and the ignition, and make sure nothing's dragging, and that automatically just shrinks the groups.
Well, and just, again, people aren't thinking about this. So how many people are running excessive and too thick of grease inside their bolt? You know, you ever pop
first thing I wipe off,
Yeah, I just pop open a guy's bolt and he's got the entire fire control group just coated in grease. Well, okay, you go out and shoot and it's 10 degrees. You go out and shoot when it's 70 degrees. Stuff's going to have a completely different way it interfaces with those components. It's going to change the entire timing of your rifle.
Here's how important Speedy, where he places ignition in his, and I don't have to ask him, I know. If you take him and you say, I want you to build me a rifle, and you take him a custom action, that thing's going to come back with a fluted shroud. You know what it means when there's a fluted shroud on one of Speedy's rifles? That means he went through that entire bolt and made sure everything was good, because he will not build your rifle and he's not going to stamp his name on it unless he goes through the firing system, because he knows that could wreck the entire thing.
Yep.
You know?
Well, and it makes it so that, and that's the thing. You mentioned earlier when we were talking, you go out and shoot one time and it's just bug holing, everything is perfect. You go the next time and it's different. I wonder how many people are thinking about this. You know, the fact that the lubrication that you've used in your fire control group can massively affect the timing of your rifle, completely change everything about the ignition timing, and throw you completely out of your node.
I wonder how many blame. And see, this is what I mean. Is people focus on so many things, but it's like they disregard the simplest ones, right? Mm-hmm. They're always worried about, they want a powder that is not affected by temperature, but then they got tons of grease in that bolt that is 100% affected by temperature.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, this powder doesn't shoot in the cold. Well, is it the powder or is it all that grease you got in that bolt that's really ruining the whole thing, you know? And then they just blame. I notice that people tend to blame what's out of their control, right? Because if it's the powder, it's not their fault.
Then they can't fix it, so they don't have to try.
Exactly. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's stuff that you must look at. You know, right? You have to inspect the entire system and make sure like the jacket example I gave you, right? Doesn't matter if you have the best jacket in the world. If you don't zip it up, it's not performing to its full potential, right?
The thing that astonishes me about this whole discussion, as someone I've devoted my life to mentoring shooters and innovating in this discipline, the thing that astonishes me the most is how poorly shooters can be performing, and they will just accept it because they think it's them in some capacity. When in actuality, all it is some particular variable that they're not accounting for, or some process that they're not executing correctly. We did in-person training classes all the time before COVID. Mm-hmm. And in each of those instances, I did a little experiment. At some point, all of the students, they would be questioning whether or not it's them or their rifle or their ammo or whatever. So I would shoot. They'd be back at the staging area, and I'd have them discussing a topic amongst themselves. I would go down the line one for one and shoot a 5-shot group with every one of their rifles. And then I would send them individually to go shoot my rifle. 2 things happened in virtually every single instance. I was only able to produce results with their rifle that were marginally better than theirs. They were almost universally better, but only marginally so, right? It wasn't a huge change. Conversely, they shot the smallest groups of their lives, more centered on point of aim than any in their lives on my rifle. And so it illuminated to them as like, hey, you're a significantly better shooter than you think you are.
This brings up the other one. We're gonna have to do another one for sure. But this brings up my rifle shoots better than I do. You've heard this one, right?
So many times.
Oh, and I'm like, how do you know? Like, you don't know that, and it's most of the time not true. Like almost 100% of the time, it's not true. Almost, and they go, yep. And I actually, a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, somebody said that on social media, and I said, well, how would you know that? And then he said, he says he will upgrade whenever he can outshoot his rifle. And I'm like,
how would you know when that is?
and I asked, I said, when is that? Like, what is the metric that you follow to tell you when that is? And he goes, oh, I'll know when it happens. Okay, perfect. And of course, that's what I said. That's when I smile and walk away, right? Because I know we're having a totally, and I was honestly trying to learn something, because I'm like, but anyway, I learned nothing. But oh man, this has been great. Thank you. I know we can talk for hours, so we better shut it down and schedule another one, because this can go on forever. But
well, thanks for having me on, Eric. It's been a blast. I love talking about this stuff, and I'm so happy to be able to meet your audience. And if there's ever anything that I can do for you or for your viewers, reach out, guys. I'm here. Use the resource. You want to have a high level discussion about this stuff? I just love it. This is all I do every day, all day.
So working on this. Real quick before I leave, I did a video about a year ago on my channel with a guy named Remington, and he brought his rifle, and it was a new shooter. He just wanted to shoot with me, and I said, all right, let's go shoot. So he came down, and I think we started at 500 yards, and he just couldn't really get on target. Once he hit the target, it was very, very consistent, and I said, okay. I handed him my rifle. And all of a sudden, like, clink, 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 clink. I'm like, okay, you can shoot. All right? So you can shoot. I needed to know if he could shoot, right? Because is it the rifle or is it him? And it was really easy to find out. Okay, you can shoot. Great. And that just gave us a point to start from, right? But it's the whole shooting somebody else's rifle or letting...
Shooting a competent person's rifle. That's the thing. You can't just shoot somebody else's rifle and think that you're going to discover anything. You have to shoot a system.
A proven system.
A system, an ecosystem that's been worked out, right? Yeah. That's when you can actually discover this, and you're going to learn very quickly. I've got tons of content on YouTube. I did that Bullets from the Bible series. I don't know if you've seen that. But instructing people how to maintain natural point of aim, how to drive that rifle properly through the recoil impulse, all that stuff's up on my YouTube channel. But
wait, that's not in the Bible, is it?
We call it Bullets from the Bible because we have a faith-based discussion along with the rifle discussion.
For a minute, I just wanted to clarify. I'm like, don't tell me. Natural point of aim is in the Bible.
It kind of is, but
well, again, they're gonna have to go check it out too. But like I said, we're about to start another one, so we better shut it down.
Yeah, we better hang it up.
Thank you, man. We'll have to do this again.
You bet. Thank you. Have a good one.
Where can they find you? PrimalRights.com.
PrimalRights.com. We've got a library section there and an articles subsection. It's great content there to check out. We're on YouTube, which is just YouTube/Primal Rights. And then I'm on Instagram, and I put out content on Instagram first most of the time, just because it's easy. So it's at Primal Rights on Instagram. But yeah, come follow, subscribe, get the notification bell and all that stuff. And if you need help with something, reach out. I'm here for you.
All right, man. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it.
See ya.